Top 10 Most Haunted Museums in the World. Number 10, R.M.S. Queen Mary, Long Beach, California, USA. This retired ocean liner sailed the Atlantic Ocean from 1936 to 1967. During its first 3 years at sea, the Queen Mary carried dignitaries and Hollywood celebrities, including General Dwight Eisenhower, Elizabeth Taylor, and Audrey Hepburn. Its days as a luxury ship were short-lived, however, and in 1939 it was stripped of its amenities and began its second life as the Grey Ghost, a World War II troop ship. At the conclusion of the war, it was restored to its former glory and traversed the Atlantic for nearly 2 more decades. On Halloween 1967, the Queen Mary departed on its last cruise, eventually docking in Long Beach, California, its final resting place. The ship is reportedly haunted by the spirits of those who died aboard, including the young sailor crushed to death by a door in the engine room and a crew member murdered in cabin B340. Winston Churchill signed the D-Day Declaration aboard the Queen Mary during World War II. The Queen Mary no longer sails the Atlantic, but it lives on as a floating hotel and restaurant on California's Pacific coast. Follow in the footsteps of its famous passengers and book a room in 2021. Return next year during the Halloween season to join the ghouls, spirits, and undead aboard the Queen Mary when it transforms into the frightening Halloween attraction, Dark Harbor. Number 9, Austria's Heeresgeschichtliches Museum, Vienna, Austria. Events are taking place across the US today to mark the centennial of the nation's entry into World War I. There's plenty of interesting bits to read about the war in our archive, but there's one story we haven't delved into before: the rumor of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria's vehicle being haunted. If you're up on basic facts about the global conflict, you know it began when Ferdinand was assassinated on a day when he had already survived an attempted bombing of his motorcade. As the Smithsonian recounts the episode, Ferdinand decided to head to the hospital to visit the victims of the bombing attempt. It was Franz Ferdinand's impulsive decision, later in the day, to visit them there, a decision none of his assassins could have predicted, that took him directly past the spot where his assassin, Gavrilo Princip, was standing. It was chauffeur Leopold Loika's unfamiliarity with the new route that led him to take a wrong turn and, confused, pull to a halt just 6 feet from the gunman. Whether or not you believe in the paranormal, there's nothing really to stand up the veracity of the death car tale other than the folklore itself. As the story goes, the Graf and Stift's subsequent owners endured a similar fate as Ferdinand. The Smithsonian cited one version of the tale from 1981 in the Weekly World News that went like this: after the armistice, the newly appointed governor of Yugoslavia had the car restored to first-class condition. But after 4 accidents and the loss of his right arm, he felt the vehicle should be destroyed. His friend Dr. Sirkis disagreed. Scoffing at the notion that a car could be cursed, he drove it happily for 6 months, till the overturned vehicle was found on the highway with the doctor's crushed body beneath it. Another doctor became the next owner, but when his superstitious patients began to desert him, he hastily sold it to a Swiss race driver. In a road race in the Dolomites, the car threw him over a stone wall and he died of a broken neck. A well-to-do farmer acquired the car, which stalled one day on the road to the market. While another farmer was towing it for repairs, the vehicle suddenly growled into full power and knocked the tow car aside in a careening rush down the highway. Both farmers were killed. Tibor Hirschfeld, the last private owner, decided that all the old car needed was a less sinister paint job. He had it repainted in a cheerful blue shade and invited 5 friends to accompany him to a wedding. Hirschfeld and 4 of his guests died in a gruesome head-on collision. By this time the government had had enough. They shipped the rebuilt car to the museum. But one afternoon Allied bombers reduced the museum to smoking rubble. Nothing was found of Karl Brunner and the haunted vehicle. Nothing, that is, but a pair of dismembered hands clutching a fragment of steering wheel. Number 8, Warren Occult Museum, Monroe, Connecticut, USA. Paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren operated for decades as the preeminent voices in the believer community, and their strange career of ghost hunting and demon busting is on display in their very own occult museum. Open since 1952, when the Warrens founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, the ever-expanding collection of knickknacks and artifacts that had been touched by evil is kept in the basement of their own home. When they weren't delving into high-profile cases of demonic mischief as the Amityville haunting, the murderer who claimed demonic possession as his defense, and the exorcism of the witch Bathsheba, a case which was most recently portrayed in the film, The Conjuring, which also featured a version of the museum, the Warrens were popular lecturers in their day. Throughout these cases, the Warrens collected trinkets and totems they claim were defiled by evil, locking them in the museum to keep them safe from the public. The eccentric collection contains everything from an alleged vampire's coffin to a child's tombstone used as a satanic altar. Death curses, demon masks, and psychic photographs line the museum's walls, accented by a Halloween store's bounty of plastic props, assumedly for mood. However, the most prevalent item seems to be the cursed Raggedy Ann doll by the name of Annabelle, which was said to have killed a man. Annabelle sits in her glass case, backlit by a haunting red light. Looking at the Warrens' collection, one might begin to think that hell has a thing for dolls. Unfortunately, Ed Warren passed away in 2006, but Lorraine Warren and their son still attend the museum. Whether or not one believes in the paranormal, the Warrens' Occult Museum may be one of the preeminent chronicles of modern culture's obsession with the supernatural. Of course, it could also be just a spooky collection of stuff in an older woman's basement. March 2018, the museum is currently closed while looking for a new location due to zoning issues. June 2019, Lorraine Warren died April 18, 2019, and the museum has closed. Number 7, Zach Bagans' The Haunted Museum, Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. Zachary Alexander Bagans is an American paranormal investigator, actor, television personality, museum operator, and author. He is the principal host of the Travel Channel series Ghost Adventures. In 2004, Bagans teamed up with Nick Groff and Aaron Goodwin to produce a documentary-style film called Ghost Adventures. The film aired on the Sci-Fi Channel in 2007. A successor series premiered in 2008 on the Travel Channel and has aired for 19 seasons as of 2019. Ghost hunting shows in general, and Ghost Adventures in particular, have been accused of fakery. From 2014 to 2016, Bagans helmed a spin-off series titled Ghost Adventures, Aftershocks, which focused on changes to people's lives after prior Ghost Adventures investigations. Meet the Dybbuk Box, in 2003, Portland, Oregon writer and furniture refinishing business owner Kevin Mannis purchased the cabinet from the yard sale of a local attorney and began developing a backstory. According to Mannis, the carving in the back of it is my carving. The stone that was in the box is something that is a signature creation of mine also. Make no mistake, I conceived of the Dybbuk Box, the name, the term, the idea, and wrote this creative story around it to post on eBay. Mannis' auction description included a story claiming the cabinet was previously owned by a survivor of the Holocaust in Poland who said it contained the malicious spirit of a Dybbuk, and that the box had paranormal powers and was responsible for his bad luck and nightmares. Subsequent owners retold Mannis' story when reselling the item and amplified it with their own claims of strange phenomena. One owner, Jason Haxton, director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine in Kirksville, Missouri, launched a website that consolidated claims about the cabinet called DybbukBox.com that reportedly received hundreds of thousands of hits and created what has been described as an internet legend. In 2004, Haxton sold the rights to the story to a Hollywood production company. The subsequent film The Possession, produced by Sam Raimi, was released in 2012. Haxton later gave the cabinet to Ghost Adventures star Zach Bagans to display in his museum. In 2018, rapper Post Malone claimed a spate of bad luck was caused by his contact with the cabinet. Meet Peggy. On the surface, she looks like your average doll with your standard issue glassy blue eyes and cute Doris Day bob. But Peggy isn't so innocent. She's actually possessed by an impish spirit. British paranormal investigator Jane Harris reported over 80 cases of people having chest pains, nausea, and debilitating headaches after looking at photos or videos of Peggy. Some even recalled they saw visions of mental institutions combined with intense anxiety, and one claimed Peggy gave her a heart attack, according to the Daily Mail. Harris, who runs an organization called Haunted Dolls, was sent Peggy by her previous owner who claimed the doll was haunting her dreams. She'd wake up feeling hot and shaken, Harris said. No matter where she moved the doll to in her home, the nightmares persisted. She apparently sought the help of a local priest, but 2 visits later, there was no change. After the woman suffered from fever and hallucinations, she ultimately stumbled across Harris's website on good old Google, as you do when you're looking for illogical answers to mystery ailments. Number 6. St. Augustine Lighthouse, St. Augustine, Florida, USA. The history of the St. Augustine Lighthouse dates back to 1589, when very old maps detailed Sir Francis Drake's raid of the coast. There, on Anastasia Island, was a mention of a wooden watchtower. Built to support the nearby Castillo de Marcos, this watchtower survived numerous changes of hands. Each new conqueror had their own particular idea of not only how the tower should function, but of its design. They added to it, then took those additions away, then added them again. And throughout this constant redesign, the watchtower saw its share of epic battles. Take the R.M.S. Industry, which sank in 1763, taking along with it all of the iron and axes and grindstones Britain had sent over to use in building the new American colonies. Or how about the 16 ships that wrecked on one very rambunctious New Year's Eve, fleeing the aftermath of the Americans' victory in the Revolutionary War? Then there are the more eccentric stories, like those of pirate invaders or that of a Spanish captain who cut off the ear of an accused smuggler. The lighthouse as seen today was built after the fall of the South in the Civil War. Concern grew over the state of the tower. Was its position the most strategic? Was the worn-out lighthouse, which had gone through one remodel too many, going to fall into the ocean? Luckily, funding was granted to build a new lighthouse nearby the original site in 1874. The new tower soon saw its own share of woes, though. Take the World War II era, when the coast was rife with German U-boats prowling the coastline. St. Augustine's lighthouse is so steeped in a violent maritime past, it is no wonder the ghosts have decided to take up permanent residence. But what is it they are trying to tell you? One of St. Augustine Lighthouse's most famous ghosts is that of lighthouse keeper Peter Rasmussen. Known for his careful watch over the tower, Peter also adored the finer things in life. It seemed keeping up with modern luxuries was of utmost importance to him, so he ensured that bathtubs, closets, and lavatories were installed in the keeper's house. But if there was one thing Peter loved more than any of these other luxuries, it was cigars. And it seems his desire for the finer things continued into the next life, for if you were to visit the St. Augustine Lighthouse and the lighthouse keeper's quarters, you might begin to wonder, do you detect the scent of cigar smoke? It is not that of a mischievous docent. It's Mr. Rasmussen, still watching over his beloved lighthouse. Or what about the ghost of another lighthouse keeper, Joseph Andrew, who fell to his death from the top of the tower, when the scaffolding used to complete paint repairs failed? Apparitions are often tied to places when they met sudden death. Is Joseph Andrew still in the lighthouse, trying to sort out why he was taken from this earth so unexpectedly? Those who hear the screams of a man falling to his death can certainly attest to the chilling nature of such a spectacle. The most famous ghosts of St. Augustine's Lighthouse, however, are those of Eliza and Mary, the daughters of Hezekiah Pity. He had been hired to carry out construction work and repairs on the St. Augustine Lighthouse, and used a cart to carry his wares back and forth. One distracted moment proved to be fatal when a group of children, including his daughters, saw the cart as a toy. The cart, unsecured, tumbled down the hill and into the bay. While several of the other children were rescued, Eliza and Mary plunged to a watery grave. The young girls seem to be at play to this day, however, for the sound of their laughter echoes throughout the hallways and grounds of the lighthouse. So if you see a young girl in a blue velvet dress, it is likely not a Pinterest-perfect young girl posing for social media. It's probably Mary Pity herself. These playful specters don't mean to frighten you. They merely want to play a game with you. Number 5, Monte Cristo Homestead, Juni, NSW, Australia. Apparitions, strange orbs, poltergeists, and phantom noises are attributed to the tragic history of this isolated house on a hill overlooking the town of Juni. Built by farm owner Christopher Crawley in 1884, the house passed to his wife, Elizabeth Crawley, on his death in 1910. Unable to get over her husband's death, Elizabeth spent the rest of her life as a recluse. She converted the upstairs box room to a chapel and immersed herself in the Bible, allegedly leaving the house only twice before her death from a ruptured appendix. Mrs. Crawley's ghost is said to haunt her former home. The sensation of ice-cold air falling like snow reportedly indicates her presence. A chain of violent events in the house have triggered other supernatural incidents. A maid once plummeted to her death from the upstairs balcony, and the figure of a woman in period dress has been seen walking along the veranda to the blood-stained steps where she fell. A stable boy who burned to death in his bed at the hands of his master is thought to haunt the coach house, while the ghost of a mentally disabled man named Harold wanders the grounds. Kept chained in the caretaker's cottage for 40 years, Harold was found curled up at the feet of his mother's dead body. He died shortly after being sent to a home for the insane. The sound of clanking chains is said to warn of his approach. Number 4, Castle of Good Hope, Cape Town, South Africa. As one of Cape Town's oldest buildings, the Castle of Good Hope has many a tale to tell. Workers and visitors report hearing voices and footsteps in the windowless dungeon and in the narrow corridors of the building. The bell in the bell tower, which was walled up centuries ago after a soldier hung himself with the bell rope, sometimes rings of its own accord. A black dog is also said to haunt the property and has been known to approach visitors and then disappear. Lady Anne Barnard is another of the castle's ghostly residents. In the late 18th century, Lady Anne lived at the castle as the colony's first lady and often entertained important dignitaries. It seems even death won't stop her from fulfilling her duties. Her ghost is said to appear even today when important dignitaries visit. Another known ghost story is that of Governor Peter Gisbert van Nod, who was apparently a strict and militant man, once sentencing 7 soldiers to die by hanging. One of the soldiers is said to have cursed him. Later that day, Van Nod was found dead at his desk, having died of a heart attack. Number 3, Blundell's Cottage, Canberra, Australia. Blundell's Cottage is a small rubble and brick construction nestled in Commonwealth Park next to Lake Burley Griffin. Built in the early 1860s, it reflects the history of Australia's white settlement through the establishment of large stations that laid the foundations for the rural socio-economic growth, in this case the Campbell family and their employees on Duntroon Estate. Sitting quietly under yellow box, white cedar, and pencil pines, its cultural and historical significance lies in its direct link to agricultural workers from the very first days of settlement in the Canberra region. However, this is not my concern. Tragically, in 1892, Flora Susanna Blundell, whilst wearing a white crinoline dress, burned to death when the dress touched a hot iron, immediately engulfing the poor girl in flames. Today one can visit her grave in the Presbyterian section of Queanbeyan Riverside Cemetery. And thus stories of her ghost haunting the old house have some basis in history. Stories of Blundell's cottage and its haunting are fairly common. The staff that man the little museum talk about odd things that happen in Cottage, including items being mysteriously moved overnight to unexplained feelings of someone watching you, and even more unnerving, the smell of burning human flesh. Bizarrely, it is said that only people wearing a necklace can feel the presence of this spirit, which probably explains why I have never seen or felt anything whenever I have visited the place. And the reason for this? It is said that Flora was wearing a necklace, maybe a favorite one, when she died. And so, knowing the cultural and social history of this quaint little rubble stone cottage, I ventured out one freezing winter's night to simply wander around the site to experience whatever may, or probably may not, happen. Number 2, Old Parliament House, Canberra, Australia. A story about a ghost on the back benches of the House of Representatives is spooking visitors to Old Parliament House. Staff at the Museum of Australian Democracy, MOAD, are enjoying a huge public response to a new nighttime tour of the 90-year-old building. We've come across some very interesting stories of death and near-death experiences in the building for our research for the tour, Brian Leadbeater said. Mr. Leadbeater is the museum's visitor experience coordinator. There are stories to be told that allow people to see our museum in a different light. There have been deaths recorded in both chambers in both the House of Representatives and the Senate as well as in King's Hall. And we're not talking about political careers, we're talking about actual deceased people. The museum's initial ghost tour ran as part of this year's Canberra Writers' Festival and sold out so quickly that organizers decided there was an appetite for more. Some of our security guards have amazing stories about close encounters, Mr. Leadbeater said. It was one of our cleaners who was working in the House of Representatives quite regularly who claimed that there was a ghost at one of the back benches who would regularly call her name. We're trying to figure out who this character was. Number 1, Fort East Martello Museum, Key West, Florida. The Martello Gallery Key West Art and Historical Museum, also known as the East Martello Tower, is a historic site located at 3501 South Roosevelt Boulevard, Key West, Florida, United States. On June 19, 1972, it was added to the U.S. National Register of Historic Places. It is the best preserved example of the Martello style of military architecture in the country. The site is now known as the Fort East Martello Museum and Gardens, and features exhibits of local history and art. Displays include early settlement, sponging and fishing, Cuban influence, military involvement, writers, and other characters. The museum notably houses Robert the Doll, a supposedly haunted doll belonging to the late artist Robert Eugene Otto. The museum also features works by folk artist Mario Sanchez, and art created from junk by Stanley Papio. The Key West Art and Historical Society operates the museum. Meet Robert. Robert the Doll is an allegedly haunted doll exhibited at the East Martello Museum. Robert was once owned by Key West, Florida, painter and author Robert Eugene Otto. The doll originally belonged to Robert Eugene Otto, an artist described as eccentric, who belonged to a prominent Key West family. The doll was reportedly manufactured by the Stiff Company of Germany, purchased by Otto's grandfather while on a trip to Germany in 1904, and given to young Otto as a birthday gift. The doll's sailor suit was likely an outfit that Otto wore as a child. The doll remains stored in the Otto family home at 534 Eaton Street in Key West while Otto studied art in New York and Paris. Otto married Annette Parker in Paris on May 3, 1930. The couple returned to the Otto family home in Key West to live there until Otto died in 1974. His wife died 2 years later. After their deaths, the Eaton Street home containing the doll was sold to Myrtle Reuter, who owned it for 20 years until the property was sold to the current owners, who operate it as a guest house. In 1994, the doll was donated to the East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida, where it eventually became a popular tourist attraction. It is annually rotated to the old post office and custom house in October. According to legend, the doll has supernatural abilities that allow it to move, change its facial expressions, and make giggling sounds. Some versions of the legend claim that a young girl of Bahamian descent gave Otto the doll as a gift or as retaliation for a wrongdoing. Other stories claim that the doll moved voodoo figurines around the room, and was aware of what went on around him. Still other legends claim that the doll vanished after Otto's house changed ownership a number of times after his death, or that young Otto triggered the doll's supernatural powers by blaming his childhood mishaps on the doll. According to local folklore, the doll has caused car accidents, broken bones, job loss, divorce and a cornucopia of other misfortunes, and museum visitors supposedly experience post-visit misfortunes for failing to respect Robert.